Welcome, everybody. As you should see on your screen, we'd love for you to indicate where you're joining us from. So you can either scan the QR code or you can go to that website and punch in the code there. And then you can, we'll form a little word cloud here of where everybody's coming from.
I'm going to do it, Wally. I'm going to do it.
Yeah, I guess so.
Gray County.
Awesome. I don't see yours in there yet, Jody.
I somehow lost the page, so now I'm looking for it.
Oh.
I'm coming. Oh, I know what I did.
Whoops.
Wally, are you truly Tim Richter?
Oh, did I not change my email? I am better.
I am going to put my pronouns in there.
It's
Hi, Gina. How's it going in Victoria? Good to see you here. And Amy from Winnipeg. See, I brought my peeps to the call, Wally.
yeah, good for you. So yeah, new people coming in. Definitely add your community to our Slido here. Just scan the code or go to that website.
Just get in there
and it'll be nice for you to do that because we're going to actually have about 3 other slides where we'll be asking poll questions on this same platform. And so if you've got it already logged in, then the question will automatically come up for you when you get to that slide.
Holly and Gina and the folks who are here from BC thinking of you. Hope things are going well.
Yeah.
Crazy times in the last few weeks.
I'm wondering if everybody's invested in a boat now. Yeah.
Molly, too soon. Too soon. Hi, Diana in Vancouver. Is that boat still on your shore in English Bay? Is it English Bay that was washed up? The barge? Was it a barge? I should know. I've been off the grid on news lately, so I just seem to recall that something washed ashore in the West End.
Nelson, awesome.
Nelson's just across the lake from my old stomping grounds, even though I'm here now.
So as people are coming in too, I just want to let you know that this is planned to be very interactive. We're going to be getting your responses, having you folks talk, share your questions and so forth associated with governance. So start thinking now about kind of where your community or your system is at with governance. And yeah, we may tug at you a little bit throughout this session. This is going to be a true community of practice call.
Yeah.
It's about talking to each other, supporting each other, and sharing thoughts and ideas.
Really just a great place for you to connect with other folks, make connections, so that after this call, you're able to continue that in your everyday, having names and people to turn to in other parts of the country that are experiencing the same process. And the barge is still in the West End. That must be a really strange sight.
I actually don't know the story of that barge.
Well, it washed ashore, as I understand it. It washed ashore in Vancouver with the first big storm that they had, and it's actually aground in English Bay. And what I heard was they don't actually know how they're going to move it, because it's a barge and it's huge. And how do you move a barge?
Yeah. So was it damaged and like, did it wash ashore? Nobody was on it. Like, I don't get it. Like, was it an abandoned barge?
I think the storm was just that bad, and it's aground. Don't quote me, because I'm in Halifax, so I know very little. But we had a crazy storm last night, and so there was thunder and lightning and all kinds of things. And I was on Facebook, as one is in the morning this morning, and there were pictures of a semi-trailer, truck and trailer, that had literally been knocked over on its side because of the winds. There was lightning all night. It was that classic movie kind of lightning that was flashing into the bedroom, and it would light the whole room up.
Yeah. So I see now Whitehorse and Amherst added to the list. Now I show 16 participants, but I guess that counts you and I, Jody. So there's 14 additional people here, but there should be 16 locations listed here on this word cloud.
I noticed that Joanne's here from Thunder Bay, but hasn't put that in the chat, rather than not to put you on the spot, Joanne. And I noticed Moira,
people on the spot.
Moira's here from Ottawa. If you do have the capability to scan that QR code, just go ahead and do that, and then you'll be in for the rest of the questions that are coming up, as we try to make this a little bit more interactive this time, or as interactive as we always are. I don't know which.
And if you don't have the ability to scan the QR code, that's okay. You can just go to that website and type in that code, and it'll put you to the same place.
Slido.com 304-268.
And as we said, for people who have maybe just come on, there's going to be some additional polls through this slido.com. And if you're logged in already, then those questions will automatically come up on either your phone screen or your other monitor, or wherever you're doing that from. So you can respond to them. And then we're going to use the responses of those polls to trigger questions and discussion. Oh, there we go. Hamilton, Vancouver, Ottawa. Nice. We'll just give ourselves another minute or two, and we'll get started, in case there's going to be a couple of other people. Again, we really hope that people are prepared to be conversational and to share your voice in this call. We want to hear from you, and other communities want to hear from you.
And Amanda from Amherst, nice to see you. Another East Coast person on the call today. That's good. So we are literally coast to coast. We've got Gina and Victoria, Amanda in Amherst, me in Ottawa, or Halifax. I'm not in Ottawa. Got Moira from Ottawa.
Yeah.
And Wally from Lethbridge.
Yeah, the only Midwesterner in this call today.
We've got as far north as Whitehorse. This is a truly pan-Canadian call. This is
Yeah.
good.
Yeah. Well, maybe we'll get started, and then if there's others that join us, they can join us. So if we want to maybe start recording, Jody.
Oh, we've been recording all along, Wally.
Oh, have we? Okay. So as you all know, we are recording. This recording will be available to people post webinar through our website at TTA training.cah.ca and under webinars and under archives. So feel free to have a look at that later. It'll probably be tomorrow or the next day. It'll be up and available. But let's get started. As we said, we're here to talk about governance, and this is a community of practice call. We want to talk about talk about what's going on in your community and what's happening there, and we'll get into that in a little bit here. But first, I want to do our land acknowledgement here. We actually try to do a sort of a coast to coast to coast land acknowledgement, and so I will just read that off for us today. From coast to coast to coast, we acknowledge the ancestral territory of all of the Inuit, Métis, and First Nations people that call this land home. We recognize the historic and ongoing impacts of colonization and are committed to decolonization of our systems and ongoing reconciliation, guided in our work by the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. The TRC calls to action missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, calls to justice, and the principles of empowerment and self-determination. The Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness is committed to equity, dignity, justice, and belonging, and we are dedicated to serving equity-seeking communities as anti-racist, anti-oppressive, and inclusive allies. And I will just indicate that I am also coming to you from Treaty 7 territory, home of the Blackfoot and the Piikani, and I'm really grateful to be able to be here and to spend my time on this land, rubbing shoulders with those peoples. So,
and I'm here from Mi'kma'ki, and yeah, I'm grateful to be in Mi'kma'ki as a settler.
Awesome, thanks, Jody. So the Canadian Alliance, our mission, I think you're all aware of this drill. You know what our mission is. It's very simple. Here is who we are in a nutshell. These are the different departments of our organization. You can go to cah.ca, click on any one of those to get further information. And so we encourage you to do that. We also want to acknowledge that we are in part funded by the Government of Canada through the Community Capacity and Innovation Funding stream of Reaching Home. And we're grateful for their support and be able to make things like this that we do possible. Here's us, Jody Yurkowski-Pace, training specialist with the Canadian Alliance, part of my staff, and then myself, Wally Check, the Director of Training. We feel very lucky and honored to be able to be here as often as we are to share and learn from and support people in their efforts. So before I move on, I just want to again reiterate what the plan is. We are here as a follow-up from the last governance webinar that we did, to really then just get into where you're at as a community and hear from you about your concerns, questions, successes, all of the things that are happening for you regarding, and this is specific to governance within your development of coordinated access and binding lists. And so we want to be able to talk with you, and we want to have you be able to talk with others that are on the call. So we're hoping that you, if you have some shyness, that you can maybe put that aside a little bit and be open to share with us. So as we go on, what's going to happen is I'm going to be bringing up on the screen elements of governance in relation to our Canadian Alliance Coordinated Access Scorecard. And this is going to outline the different components that is required in establishing and developing your governance setup and processes. And so I'm going to bring up the point from the scorecard, and then I'm going to ask you a question through that slido.com application. And then you will see the poll results come up on the screen from that question. And we're going to kind of evaluate what that shows us and then try to draw some conclusions and then ask some questions. And we're hoping that people will be open to then sharing. And so what we would ask is that you indicate in the chat if you're open to sharing, and then we can unmute you and we can have you talk. And if there's someone who wants to make an additional comment to what someone else said, that's fine. Let's unmute you. Let's have a conversation online. So we hope to be that free flowing. Jody and I, we can fill space if we need to. You know, we've got some good dad jokes and things like that, but we prefer not to fill it with that. We prefer to fill it with your comments and discussion about governance. So with that being said, then I'm going to move on. We'll go to the first piece or component of governance. So what you're going to see is this is actually taken right off of our scorecard. So item 1.1 on our scorecard says, has your community identified a coordinated access lead organization or organizations? This is a reaching home requirement. What you also see here is that what we've developed in our scorecards, and some people will look at these components, others will not for now, but we also have different steps in terms of advancement in your ability to have a quality coordinated access system functioning. And so we go from the basic reaching home requirements to then what is basic coordinated access and then what is advanced coordinated access. And as you see right now, in terms of this point, your community identifying a lead organization, there's nothing further to do to be in that advanced category. This is just identifying your lead organization is all there is for this point. So I'm going to go to the next slide with our first Slido question. And again, if you haven't logged into this yet to tell us where you're from, it's the same code. You should see it on your phone screen or wherever it is you logged into it. But if you haven't yet, feel free to scan that QR code or log into that website at slido.com. Use the code 304268. And if you folks would just answer this question, our biggest struggle in identifying a lead organization for our CA system is or was. And I say was because maybe you've already gone through this. Maybe you've already tackled this, and so you can answer, you know, based on what it was, versus people who are still in the process right now of identifying that lead organization. And so right now, the way it looks is that there is the vast majority of people saying something other than what was listed here. So I'm really curious to know what some of those others are.
Yeah.
So the people who have said other, be thinking about that and maybe even state it in the chat, and then we will ask you if you would speak further to that. Knowing what a lead organization actually does is actually now tied with other. And then of course, knowing the best options for a lead organization. So who plays that role? Who are good choices to play that role of a lead organization? So go ahead, Joe.
That's often been what I've been asked as I'm talking to communities who are really as time's gone on in the beginning, talking to organizations that were really struggling with this and grappling with it, saying, okay, well, what is it that they're actually going to do? And how do I know who to choose? So those really fit, but I'm curious about the other. I want to know what that is as well.
So anybody that stated other, again, please maybe just write in the chat what other was, and then we would love to take you off mute to talk about that. And it can just be brief, but we want to hear from you, and other communities want to hear from you as well. So these others are going to be important information for lots of people.
Oh, we've got one from Caitlin. Caitlin, are you, would you be willing to speak to your answer? If so, just give us an indication in the chat and then we can, oh yeah, Caitlin is able to do that.
Very awesome. Thanks, Caitlin. Jody's going to take you off mute, and we'd love to hear from you.
Okay, Caitlin, there you go. You should be coming up here to join us.
Hi, can you hear me?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Great. I will apologize in advance. I'm in the country, so the internet is not perfect. So if I go in and out, I do apologize.
No worries. You're good now.
I chose other, which was a bit of just a sidestep from knowing what the lead organization actually does. We have a committee of identified organizations that are meeting and are on paper committed to building a coordinated access system, but really building that buy-in and that 100% commitment, and it not being just on the side of some people's desk is what the current struggle has been.
Oh, I see. So people are committed to participating, but there's a challenge with having sort of that dedicated, full-blown buy-in.
And it sounds like not taking too much on, or not feeling that they have the capacity to take too much on. Am I hearing that right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, just like committed, but not entirely committed.
So Caitlin, how have you been approaching that? Like what steps has your community been taking to kind of try to navigate that?
So I am a month and a bit into a new position that now the county oversees, which is the homelessness response coordinator. So, and I'm new to the area. So I think actually me coming in with some fresh eyes and new energy to try to just build that enthusiasm is currently the approach that I'm taking. And also to just to lean on like our Built for Zero coach to build that excitement. I think it's really about the excitement and fostering that passion right now, and showing that the structure will be there to be able to enable folks to do the work without taking on more work. And then lastly, I think especially getting that buy-in that building a coordinated access system is actually about making it less work for us, and to have a coordinated and succinct system will actually mean in the long run that it doesn't have to be on the side of our desk, because it's just naturally built into what we're doing.
Gotcha. Awesome. That's thanks for sharing that information. And I think that, you're probably, well, I know you're not alone in that, in people feeling like, yeah, okay, this is important, but it's a lot of work. And how do we manage that with our existing capacity, with our existing staffing models and so forth? And, but it sounds like in your role, you might be, I love your thoughts about being fresh eyes. And sometimes that's what people need, is to have sort of a new perspective come in and give them insight, come in with a new energy and so forth. So I'm glad that you're taking those steps.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, instead of that idea of this sounds great, okay, who's going to do it?
Can I add something too? Like just a suggestion if folks are in the same situation. I was hired from another community, and I'm not suggesting go and get staff from other communities, but I think it helped to come from elsewhere where coordinated access was a bit further along in the process, to say it actually works. And I was a frontline staff and I saw clients get housed, to actually just like show that it has worked elsewhere. So there's a reason why we're doing it.
Oh, nice. That's great. I think those examples of success are huge factors that need to be brought into community discussions, right? So and that's why we do things like this. The more that the different communities can hear that message, the more likely they are to try to take additional steps. Really appreciate that comment.
Thank you, Caitlin. We have Axel from Nelson, I believe,
Yeah.
who was talking about, that idea of an obvious choice, but perceptions of a monopoly and empire building and stuff like that. So I'm actually going to allow Axel to join us here. He's agreed, and welcome. Tell us more.
Hi, everybody. Yeah, so I was hired as the coordinated access lead in July, but the lead organization, we had a consultant, Linda the chef, who was working on our model, and so I'm not actually sure what the process was of determining our lead agency, but I assume that that it's partially because the organization that hired me, that is our lead agency, Nelson Cares, holds the Reaching Home contract and just does a lot of housing and runs the shelter and all of these things that are really connected, and also just has the capacity in some ways to take on that role.
Mm-hmm.
And I think because we're a small community, there's a population of 10,000 in Nelson. We have only a few agencies that might be available and working in the sector, that in some ways, that creates kind of an obvious choice. But at the same time, there's also perceptions that Nelson Cares has so much control because, it runs the shelter, it runs housing. We don't have a supportive housing site, but we have kind of a semi-supported housing site run by Nelson Cares, and there are a few other nonprofit housing providers, but Nelson Cares mainly is the provider in our community. So there's that perception, not necessarily from other agencies, but from the people that we serve. That if people get restricted from services or suspended from services of Nelson Cares, that there's this injustice happening potentially, and I think it's valid as well. I don't think it's just a perception. I think there's some truth to it for sure, of people who have been evicted from Nelson Cares properties in the past, and I think part of what we're seeing with this shared governance and trying to kind of also have our systems table involved, and also one of the ways I think this has been addressed is that we have a lived expertise agency as part of our governance structure. So there is another agency that's kind of taking a lead role from a different perspective, and also I think the way that coordinated access will help kind of break down some of the issues is through the transparency and having different agencies sitting at the assessment and matching table, and also hopefully being able to hold more of an advocacy perspective for people, and looking at what does transformative justice look like for people that have had past tendencies with Nelson Cares that have not worked out well, and how can we kind of restore some of those relationships by bringing in other agencies and other supports, and that kind of transparency of having that shared governance. So I think those are some of the ways that we're trying to address that perception. And also in my role, it's not that I'm trying to distance myself from Nelson Cares, but trying to be clear to people that I work for the community. And though it's Nelson Cares that manages the funding and pays my wages, that actually I work for the whole community, and coordinated access is not just a project of Nelson Cares, but that it's a system for all of Nelson.
I think there's some great stuff that you brought up, Axel, and I think a couple of things that you really highlighted for me is that, and I think it's tied to knowing what a lead organization actually does, as well as best options for a lead organization. I think you've hit on a few things that speak to all of these options, and that part of that is, I think we have to consider when choosing a lead organization, what that perception will be, right? What people will see and think, and how it will be received. And maybe a certain organization isn't the best option because of some of those potential perceptions. And so it's just a matter of asking those questions, right? It doesn't mean you can't still have that organization. It's just, I think those are considerations that have to be brought into the discussion. The other thing that stood out for me was the importance of ensuring that the lead organization, that we understand that the term lead doesn't necessarily mean top-down leadership, right? That the lead organization is really just meaning that they are there to ensure that the process is formulated and developed and monitored, and they're responsible for continual adjustments and improvements, but based on community-wide feedback and involvement. And so I think those are some really important things that stood out as you spoke.
Another thing that I would add, Wally, that really got me excited about what Axel was saying is that that piece around owning some of the perceptions, not being knee-jerk and dismissing them, owning them, and working through a process where it's client-centered, and there is an onus to build trust again, and to say, okay, fine, we recognize that these perceptions are, perception is 2020. Whoever sees it, that is reality for them. So we are going to do what we can to ensure that your perception shifts over time, and that you see this as fair, and that you see Nelson Cares in a different way based on this interaction rather than the transactions that have happened in the past. That's exciting to me.
Yeah. And, just as a side thought, even if Nelson Cares is, or any other organization like it, is saying, okay, we're the community entity, we want to ensure that the staffing is available as a lead organization. They also don't necessarily have to label that as Nelson Cares, right? It can be labeled as a sort of a separate funded project in a sense, right? So, there's some logistics associated with trying to keep that separation, but if that separation is deemed important by a community, well, then there are ways that you can do that.
Yeah.
Okay, that's great. I think let's move on to the next question, just so we have time to address them all. But people, please feel free to continue to throw comments in the chat about any of these that we go through, and we'll try to get to them if we can.
Oh, we've got one more from Gina and Victoria before you move forward, Wally. And Gina's just talked about considerations on choosing a lead organization here are related to capacity and how it could be sustainably funded. So that idea of not just what we do now, but the legacy of it. And that's
Does Gina want to say more about that?
Gina, I'm going to allow you to talk, and you can say yes or no.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's a question that our entire community has, related to this, and the HIFIS question here in BC is how is this going to be funded, and capacity. I think that the organization that takes this on needs to also have some perhaps background or experience, or and be regarded as an organization that can do it and can implement coordinated access successfully. So do they have the capacity? How are they going to be funded? Those are really important questions here. And we can't use reaching home funding to sustainably fund this because we don't know our budget from one year to the next. So that's an issue for us.
Yeah, interesting. And I think that's something probably people don't think a lot about all the time is how do we make sure that funding is sustainable? And Jody and I were actually having a conversation earlier today about this idea of what is funded, what isn't funded, and what things should be just expected for people to take on and so forth. And I think you're making the point that we can't expect people to take on additional roles without the appropriate compensation. And at least that will make sure that the capacity is there to do the job properly. But I also heard you say, Gina, that along with having the capacity, you said something about a level of expertise. And I guess part of what I heard in there was more so about that they are respected, that they're an organization that is respected enough that people will allow them to take that lead role in a way that then creates collaboration and coordination in an efficient way. Would that be fair?
Yes, I think that would be fair to say.
Okay.
Yeah, and that can be difficult. That can be really difficult. I mean, I'm sure that nobody in this call has ever been in a community with silos.
Yeah, really. Well, and back to what Axel was saying, right? I mean, how when you have people who there's no housing organization that doesn't have negative experiences, right? That like there's no organization where every single participant or client has been happy. It's just the way it is. And so you're going to have some of those challenges no matter who you are. If you're into housing at all, where you're going to have people who have been disappointed or frustrated with whatever service you're providing them. So, yeah.
Wally, one of the things that I've had conversations with folks on is, and not particularly with the lead organization, but this feeds into it, is finding the folks that have not only the experience working in this sector, but the understanding of data and the understanding of systems and the understanding of how to put this all together. And so you and still understand the sector and understand what it's like working on the front lines and understanding all of those pieces. And so you get paralyzed looking for a unicorn.
Yeah.
Because there are a few of those folks who have the perfect blend of everything that you need for this role.
Yeah, exactly. I just wanted to mention before we move on that when we talk about, what a lead organization actually does, there are resources where you can get more in-depth information about that. If you go back into our archives, there's a couple of webinars that describe, governance and what a lead organization does. There is also through the Built for Zero resources, there's a coordinated access guide, as well as the Reaching Home coordinated access guide, and our scorecard guide that are available to anybody who wants to see that information, that can give you a lot more details. But if you're still struggling, then contact whoever your Built for Zero improvement advisor is, or if you're a TTA community in all of that, we'd be happy to sit down and talk to you further about the specifics of what a lead organization does. So let's go on to the next piece. So this is also part of governance. Has your community put in place a coordinated access governance model? So you have the lead organization, but then you have the model of governance. And so Axel was kind of speaking to this around, well, and so was, who was the first person that was talking with us? Caitlin. Caitlin was talking about this as well, as the different sort of components of the community that are tied into informing how coordinated access is developed and sustained and so forth. So that's kind of your model, is who oversees the development and implementation of coordinated access. How does the lead organization held accountable, and who are they held accountable to? And who's advising on the development of this? So the question is, and from reaching home, all you're required is to be able to have a model in place. If you want to advance yourselves in having a little bit more, a little bit improved coordinated access system, then you'll have that model documented, and you will have in place processes that allow for timely decisions when coordinated access issues arise. So it's one thing that, you know, the coordinated access governance model, or the people at that table maybe meet on a monthly basis or whatever it is, but is it set up so that timely decisions can be made in areas of importance related to your system? So here's the question, though, that we wanted to ask. What do I most want to know about governance models? So for this one, just type in a quick statement into the slido.com here. Just type something in, let us know what's most on your mind about the actual governance model perspective. And then we'll take a look at some of the things that pop up, and then we'll ask you to speak to those a little bit. Jody, in your experience in talking to people about models while we wait for some of the responses to crop up, what do you see people asking about, talking about, thinking about the most?
Well, I think and there's so much, but I think that one of the things that sticks out and came to the top when you were saying this was, I immediately get asked for, you know, a template of what are other communities doing? What does their governance model look like? And the answer is yes. Like, I mean, it is vast and varied. And often I will send people, you know, examples of what a governance model looks like in a community, and that community's like, well, that won't work for us. That has nothing to do with the way we're doing things. And so one of the things that I think that is really interesting is that governance can look however a community needs it to look. But that opens up a whole can of worms. Like, how do you know what you want to eat from a restaurant menu if you don't know what the menu says, right? And so it's really a chicken or egg. Do I understand my community well enough to know what governance is going to look like, or do I? Yeah, I don't know if that makes sense. But
yeah, no, I completely agree, Jody. I think that sometimes communities get so caught up in the weeds when it comes to a governance model that they feel like, well, there has to be sort of the creme de la creme, or there has to be the perfect components that we can just pull together. And so if somebody's doing it really well, we should be able to just grab and copy what they're doing. Maybe you can, but in various situations, people will look at that, like Jody said, and say, no, that doesn't work. That doesn't fit our community. But yeah, then people will get paralyzed and they kind of stall and not move forward. And I will reiterate a statement that I say all the time. I stole it from someone else who I'm sure stole it from someone else, but it's this idea that imperfect practice trumps perfect planning. And so it's important to just start, important to just get things rolling. And I think that in some ways that kind of relates to the first comment that's popped up on the screen here, right? Is, do we need to know how HIFIS will work in our community first? And we're talking about BC specifically. And of course, when it comes to HIFIS, for people on the call, you need to know that BC is sort of a different monster when we're talking about HIFIS issues. Yeah. But still, do we need to know how HIFIS will work in our community first before we can move forward with the governance model? The governance model, what I will say, and then I'd love for whoever wrote this, and I'm guessing Gina or Axel or somebody else from Vancouver, BC or whatever, but wrote this. But the governance model is there to actually help make decisions about what to do regarding your HMIS platform. It's there to help look at the problems and issues that you might be having associated with that. And therefore, then there can be input and advice and ideas and suggestions given to whoever is leading the process on, okay, well then how do we want to manage this? So I'll give you an example, and it's another BC example, and maybe Axel would be willing to talk to this, but Nelson is not using HIFIS right now for their coordinated access, but yet they have a governance model. They have a leadership, a lead organization in place, and this model is in place, and they are incorporating coordinated access, but they are using something other than HIFIS. So, and the only reason that they are using something other than HIFIS is because of the issues that BC is having right now related to HIFIS. But HIFIS is not the make or break of governance or coordinated access. HIFIS is a topic that governance would address and look at. So I think that you probably want to have a governance model in place before you can really, truly, and effectively address what you're going to do regarding HIFIS. So I think it would be reversed. So I know Axel and Gina, you're both able to talk if you want to speak to that at all. Love to hear from you, or anybody else who has.
Yeah, I would just say, Wally, like you're saying, I mean, when we were having the conversation about what are we going to do about HIFIS, how are we going to manage our data, I brought that conversation to our systems table, who are the like interagency leadership executive directors and decision makers in our governance model. So I don't know how I would have made that decision about whether to move forward with HIFIS other than me individually saying, okay, this is what I think personally. But in order to like make more of a community decision, that governance model needed to already be in place so that I know, okay, who do I consult on this decision? Who can give me the feedback that I need? And I think that's one of the things that I have appreciated most about having this governance model set up when I stepped into my role, is kind of having an idea of who do I ask for information or input about what, you know,
Right.
At what level do I go to this meeting or these folks need to, you know, and what decisions can I make on my own as the kind of lead staff person versus what do I need to kind of get other people's perspectives on before we go ahead.
Right. So Axel, I'm curious, could you speak to the last sentence of this statement that's on the screen? It says, for example, if we use BC Housings, meaning BC Housing's HIFIS, do we follow their governance? And maybe before you respond to that, I will just say, I think we're talking two different things, right? Like I think that and for people that aren't in BC who might not be aware, there's challenges because BC Housing essentially holds the core license for HIFIS. And so there's been some difficulties in trying to incorporate coordinated access in a BC community because they want to incorporate other organizations that aren't necessarily funded or part of BC Housing's grouping. And so there's been some resistance to that. So there's some options that they've been given on how to move forward with HIFIS if they want to use it and so forth. But I would say that even if you were to say, okay, let's use BC Housing's HIFIS, that's one thing. And we may have to follow some of their rules regarding how HIFIS is going to work. But that's just relating to HIFIS and BC Housing. There's still your overarching coordinated access governance. So again, that governance model would be there to discuss, what do we do with this? If we're using BC Housing's HIFIS, we have to follow their rules. How do we work with that in conjunction with the rest of our system, right? So there's two different sort of levels of governance here that you're talking about. One that's sort of it would be no different than, let's say you chose an assessment tool that you wanted to use. There might be some specific guidelines and rules on how that assessment tool is used, but that doesn't mean that those guidelines circumvent your overarching coordinated access governance processes, right? So there's different rules for things, but those things are just tools that you're using within your coordinated access system. Your governance makes decisions and talks about how we deal with those tools and how we deal with the different rules and impacts that these elements of our system have. But I don't know, Axel, would you add anything to that?
No, I think that makes sense. And I think, yeah, in terms of like if we use BC Housing's governance model, I think, yeah, HIFIS is just one part, as you were saying. Like, and I know that some larger communities may have a specific, you know, data committee. We don't have that at this time. But maybe that committee would involve people from BC Housing if that's how it was going to work, you know, like to just keep them included and yeah, part of the conversation.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Now, the other comment on here, and I know that we've got something else from Diana in the chat too, but models that have committees as leadership team for CA. I'd love to hear more about what that means. So whoever made that statement, if you would let us know. And then in the meantime, does Diana want to say more? Okay, Diana's good. She wants to, she's listening and intently. That's great. Okay, so should we read Diana's comment then? What does her comment say, Jody? I can't see it. That she put in the chat about her question regarding.
No, it's just a further sort of conversation or comment on just the challenges specifically to BC and navigating that difference between BC Housing and having an HMIS that is governed by a completely different organization.
So very similar to what we were just speaking.
Yeah, exactly. Diana said that she's willing to speak up briefly if we want. I'm going to.
That's up to her. I don't want her to feel pressure. So
it's okay if you're.
Okay, sure.
Gina actually has something that she wants to say as well. So I'm going to unmute Gina first.
Go ahead, Gina.
Hi, I was the one who spoke to the models that have committee as a leadership team for coordinated access. And I think I've spoken to Jody about this in the past, but just wanted to understand the sort of pros and cons around that right now. We're just developing our governance model currently, and it's you know, there's different levels of committees set out right now, and it's all reporting to the Coalition to End Homelessness. So just curious about your comments on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think my first thought to that is that, you know, if the problem with a committee, I shouldn't say that, not the problem. One of the challenges with a committee is that the representatives of that committee, and it's no different in any other group, but they're all coming with their own sort of lens. And so those lenses all have to be navigated, right? But if the committee as a leadership team for coordinated access is functioning as leadership for coordinated access should function, then they're taking direction from governance of the coordinated access system, and they're following through with the steps that are involved, and they're given different roles and tasks related to that. So they're just divided up within that committee in terms of who's better able to address or tackle different topics. That to me, I think, is one of the advantages of a committee approach to govern or coordinated access leadership, is that you have that many more people that can fulfill different tasks associated with ensuring that your coordinated access processes run smoothly. But on the flip side of that it's that much more to monitor and to ensure, you know, people are fulfilling the roles that they take on. But again, if you're looking at the true role of leadership in coordinated access, it's really about, okay, what is our whole coordinated access system or governance model designed here? What do we have in place? What are the things that need to be happening? And how do we as leadership of that make sure that it works? So like on the image in the very opening slide of the little guy with the oil can on the gears, that's kind of what leadership is it's making sure that all of the things that have been put together in this coordinated access machine are functioning the way that they're meant to. And then providing feedback and support and monitoring and so forth of all of that. So whether it's a committee, whether it's a person, whether it's 2 or 3 people that formulates that leadership aspect, their job is to just ensure that the coordinated access system operates in the way that it was meant to or designed to. And if it's not, then talking to the governance table about what do we need to change, what needs to look different.
And having the procedures and the policies in place to make that shift if you need to, right? Making sure that it's an iterative process that is also led by the policies and procedures that you've put in place.
Mm-hmm.
Caitlin has made a comment about using committee structure in Grey and Bruce counties, and that having an impact on learning from Indigenous-led agencies. Caitlin, would you speak to that a little? That sounds exciting to me.
I think just in general, having a committee structure has allowed us to have a lot of different voices at the table, including Indigenous-led agencies. I'm employed by both Grey and Bruce County in a shared position. So having the counties be the ones with the sort of main hands-on coordinated access and knowing that they're state agencies, I think can teeter a fine line. And by having a committee, like we've had a lot of process in talking about how some of the processes are, you know, colonial in nature, and it's been challenging but positive in terms of how we can move forward in a way that ensures that we're serving Indigenous clients as well and in a culturally appropriate way.
Yeah, nice. Thank you for that. So you know what, we've got about 5 minutes left here. I want to jump to our next piece, and maybe we'll get a tiny little bit of discussion in, and it's the last component of this. So the next piece is about, from a governance perspective, part of the role of governance is to design and have documented policies and protocols and procedures related to various functions within coordinated access. What I've listed below here are what those functions are. So documented policies around triage and assessment process, intake protocol, housing resources, including eligibility and prioritization criteria, and then vacancy matching and the referral process. And so when we talk about vacancy, we're not talking about just housing, but other housing resources like case management spaces or rent subsidies or different things like that. So those are all the elements that we need to look at or that need to be put in place for governance needs to look at in coordinated access. So the question is just that. So in establishing policies and protocols for governance, our community needs the most work on, and I've listed those same things again. So if you guys would just throw them in there, and we'll capture what your thoughts are, and then maybe get a comment or two before we close. So right off the bat, housing resources, matching, okay. It's a race. The race is on.
These two are really intertwined too, so I'm interested to hear.
Yeah, like you have to have the resources in order to match people to them. So for sure. So Jody, what's standing out for you that you want to touch on quickly?
Well, I mean, you know, every community that I talk to says, well, our community is unique. We have no housing resources, which is true. We have no housing resources, and that's a challenge. But knowing the other piece of it is, in a truly integrated, coordinated access system, garnering the trust of all of the agencies to allow that matching and referral process to take place, and relinquishing what feels like control, which ultimately many agencies come back and say, wow, this has really worked for us. It's reduced our vacancy times. It's streamlined things for us. It's really made it simpler for us. But that gut reaction of, you're going to tell me who needs to go into this space? Right? So it's a real process.
Well, and I also think that, because when we talk about housing resources here, we're talking about, your policies or processes related to identifying those housing resources and managing them. And so having people be able to report vacancies and those kinds of things. And as you said, that's one of the biggest challenges is community. Like, I've literally heard a community say, what's the point of doing coordinated access if we don't have any housing?
Exactly.
Well, you got to remember that when we talk about housing resources, as we've just said, it's not just housing, because sometimes even being attached to a case manager is huge support and assistance for somebody. And maybe through that process, they're able to find an option for housing. Maybe it's even through the process of exploring family and natural supports, or, something similar. But there's also the ability to connect to some of the financial resources and other things. So it's not just housing. But when it comes to housing, what we've also seen is that as systems better coordinate, even though housing may be lacking or unavailable, as they better coordinate and as they better learn to understand, okay, what does each organization have? What do they, so for example, there's an organization that I know of, or a community that I know of, that says exactly that we don't have housing, so what's the point? But yet, in talking to many of those organizations, several of them have their own master lease with a property management company for various units. Well, that's housing. And yes, they may be full at the time, but what happens when one of them becomes vacant for various reasons? A lot of those people don't stay in the same unit forever. And so those units are likely to become vacant at some point. So what do we do with them? If your system is coordinated, now you have the ability to make sure that the person who is of the highest level of need is able to jump into that unit right away. Whereas before, it might have been a mad dash or only available to that particular organization. But if all organizations are collaborating and working together, that resource could then potentially become available to any organization who has a participant who is at the top of their priority list, right? Or at the top of the coordinated access priority list. So there's lots of evidence out there that shows that coordinating your system not only allows you to better connect the people to the right housing at the right time, but it also allows you to actually be able to see the system better, so you know where the gaps are and you can show evidence within your community of what needs to be changed or improved regarding housing availability. So when you don't have housing in the first place, coordinating allows you to better identify where you need housing and what kind of housing is important. So we've seen communities actually increase their ability to have housing available just by coordinating their system. So you can't let the fact that you have a low or nil vacancy rate stop you from coordinating your system, because even if you do, I mean, any place that I've ever been where they say we have no housing, they are still housing people. Whether it's slow or fast, it doesn't matter. They're still housing people. Another example, I talked to a community a while back where they were explaining that they had no housing, but yet they also talked about how one building that they had burned down and they were able to house 25 people in a week. And I'm not saying these people are lying to us about having no housing. It's just that when we determine that something is important enough and a crisis enough, we seem to be able to find housing.
Mobilize.
Yeah.
And I also say to folks, you know, if you're wanting to build a case for, you know, future funding for housing, saying, we have no housing and I can't do anything, is never going to do that. But working through a process like coordinated access, where you're gathering data, concrete, inarguable data, is going to build a case for something down the line. And so, you know, that's a bit of a future leap of faith, but it will net dividends in the end.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And I apologize, we don't have more time to take any more comments. However, it looks like we do have something that's come in the chat. In Vancouver, it's not only housing, it's also mental health and drug addiction. Again, we don't have enough solutions to help people who then become homeless. These issues are not addressed adequately. We need more policies and solutions. And you know what? I would say, just as a last comment to that to me, I think that's also all part of coordinating your system,
yeah.
Right? And having governance there that can help you identify those policies. And also then you have a body that has a little bit more power and influence to advocate for more widespread policy and changes within your system. So I don't think there's any negative or downside to coordinating, you know, to pulling together and getting out of the silos and creating a larger movement that is coordinated and connected and streamlined that way. Thank you, everybody, for all of your comments and for your input and willingness to speak.
Yeah.
I think there's been some great information and discussion. I hope you found this process was helpful in some way, and we really appreciate your involvement. And
Yeah.
as we said before, the recording will be available later, and even though there was really basic slides, we'll have them available as well in the archives with the recording of this.
And special thank you to Caitlin, Axel, and Gina for unmuting and joining in this conversation. Really appreciate it.
Not to say that those that didn't are, you know, negative in our eyes, but we sure appreciate the sharing for sure.
Absolutely.
Take care, everybody. Have a great rest of your day. And we look forward to seeing you all again.
Take care.
Bye-bye.